The all Pac-12 teams are out, and Utah is well represented, but were some players snubbed? And I'm not just talking about for Pac-12 teams. I'm talking about one of the Pac-12 awards even. Let's talk about it on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcasts. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media, where you can follow our show at Locked On Utes or my personal handle on X at JT Wistrcill. And my name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. And on today's show, going to be talking about the all Pac-12 teams that were released and some Pac-12 awards too, because in the second segment, I want to talk about Jonah Elliss because he was not named the Conference Defensive Player of the Year. I think there's an argument to make that he was snubbed for the award. And unfortunately, we'll close out with the news that Gianna Kneepkens has done for this season for the Utah women's basketball team, a crushing loss to their season, and just feel for her as well going through the difficulties of that. Now let's focus and shift on to the Pac-12 teams, though. As I mentioned, the all Pac-12 teams did release, and Utah is well represented on them. The first team, of course, includes Jonah Elliss, Sione Vaki, earning the right as a first team safety, but also as just the all-purpose player, a fitting nod for everything he did this season. Also talking about Jack Bomeester earning it as a punter. He got off to a great start and really never cooled down. Part of the reasons that Utah's defense, in my opinion, was so good. But look, the defense is obviously first and foremost, like the players on it. But there was also the fact that a lot of times offenses did have to drive a very low. They weren't put in bad positions by bad punts. The Utah defense wasn't. A lot of times they were put in advantageous positions because those incredible punts placed teams inside the 20 frequently. So that's the first team for Utah. Second team, Satawa Laumea, Junior Shafuna, Karene Reed, and Cole Bishop. And then you also had guys like Keaton Bills, Michael Mokofisi, and Zamaya Vaughn, who were named to the honorable mention. And my initial reaction to all of that is, I think it's incredibly fair. I like, for the most part, where all of those guys are placed. There's one guy who I think should have been bumped up a spot, really. We'll talk about more in a moment. And I think there's a lot of guys that can say, like, oh, maybe he should have been on this team. Like, maybe he should have been second, sent honorable mention. Or some of the guys, to me, like, that I could make an argument could have been honorable mention would be like a Devon Vele, a Keanu Tanuvasa, who actually got some love for Pac-12 Defensive Lineman of the Year I saw, but wasn't named an honorable mention. I thought that was interesting. Also talking about what Leavani Demuni did for Utah. I know his start was just okay, but I thought the way he closed the season warranted it. JT Broughton, Jaquindon Jackson, all guys to me that you can make an argument for deserve to be honorable mention. And some of those honorable mentions could even say like, oh, maybe Keaton Bills could have been second team, like things like that. Like, I think those are fair to make and say. But once again, I don't think any of them are really egregious as well. You know, you got guys like Spencer Fano, who were nominated for Pac-12 Freshman of the Year, or just are one of the people listed as the honorable mention for that. A great honor for him as well. So just awesome to see Utah well represented throughout this. You know, they did the awards as well. Kalen DeBoer won Coach of the Year. Absolutely should have. I think Jed Fish probably would be second for what he did at Arizona. I think you can make a really good argument, though, that Kyle Whittingham deserved to be next up on that list. Like, yes, Dan Lanning, very well. You could say he's ahead of it. I totally get that. But if you just want to talk about all the injuries that Utah suffered and the fact that this team only lost 4 games, and yes, I know they lost 4 games in conference, but it's an incredible feat. I'm not saying Kyle Whittingham should have been the Coach of the Year for the conference with what DeBoer did, going undefeated, which no Pac-12 team had ever done before. But I do think you got to give just acknowledge in general, like not the award, not the Pac-12 people I think they have, but just even just talking about it. I just reading over it. Like if this was a list, I would have been curious to see where Witt finished in Coach of the Year voting. Cause look, he shouldn't have won the award, like I said, but like with all the injuries Utah had, for them to still end the year or just in general this year, be as good as they were. I think that is quite the testament to this team overall. So diving a little bit more into the individuals, though, the one issue I did have was I feel like Cole, and this is one I've seen lots of you guys point out as well. I do feel like Cole Bishop should have been on the first team next to Sione Vaki in that spot. They instead went with USC safety Kalen Bullock, and Bullock 42 tackles, 0 forced fumbles on the season, 2 interceptions, does have 7 passes deflected. So still, look, he's a very good player. He did a good job. He made an impact. I think I can very much so make the case so that Bishop deserves that spot too. Because one thing that's also, like when you're talking about Bullock as well, this is where, look, different safeties do different things, right? But like in terms of the sack department, there's none for Bullock. Bishop had 3. He's an incredible blitzer. And yes, I know that's what I started with. Obviously, it's not the most important thing about a safety. Just bear with me, people. I can already hear some of you getting ready in the comments, firing up those fingers a little bit. Anyways, Cole Bishop, 35 tackles still. And yes, technically Bullock, and not technically, excuse me, Bullock ended the season with more than him. This is where the Arizona injury was just really unfortunate. Also, him having to miss the first half of the USC game. There's just instances where it's like, he was so close. I believe that Cole Bishop is a better player than Bullock. I think Bullock's a good player once again, but Bishop would have had those numbers if he would have been able to play in every game on the season, I do believe, or in every missed a game and a half, basically, because of some of those numbers too. Just so incredibly effective for this team all season long. Once again, the 35 tackles were solo. He actually had 60 total tackles on the season. And when you're comparing that to Bullock's total tackle, he had 61. So just one more. And we already talked about how many more snaps he was able to play because of some of those issues that Bishop had with the injuries and then the suspension too. But same amount of interceptions with 2. Also 3 passes defended versus the 7 I know that Bullock had. But once again, that's where I'm like, okay, this without the sack department, doesn't that offset a little bit? If you have all those passes deflected, but another guy is also can be a good pass rusher for you. But then that's not just and that is just what the stats say, right? That's not even talking about the incredible job that Cole Bishop does just tackling in space. And, and Bullock and Bishop both are guys who they make plays and do things that don't show up on the stat sheet. But I feel like Bishop, especially for how good this Utah defense was on the season, I know their final numbers took a tumble a little bit, but Corrine Reed, Jonah Elliss, and obviously Leonard Barton was already out and hurt. But, I mentioned Jonah Elliss, Cole Bishop, like all those guys. Sione Vaki was sick for the Arizona game. So a game in which this defense got gashed, they were missing all of their best players, basically. So the final Utah defensive numbers don't even look as indicative of how good this defense was because the defense literally was missing their best players and then got beat up there. So I do believe Cole Bishop had a better season than Bullock. I understand Bullock got the numbers slight nod there, but I do think Bishop deserved that spot. But not too mad about it. And just so great to see a lot of these guys get recognized once again. I mean, we're going to talk about Jonah Elliss in the second segment, obviously, but love seeing, it is funny how few offensive guys are on here, but just seeing all the defensive guys represented, whether it is Sione Vaki, who was sensational this year, when you're talking about had 50 tackles, 37 of those solo. Those 37 solo tackles are actually the most on the team. So really impressive stuff from Vaki in that regard. Had a couple passes deflected, an interception, just a guy, and that was in the first game against Florida. Just a guy who's always around the ball making plays. And yes, we obviously know what he was able to do offensively as well as a pass catcher and a dynamic or a pass catching running back and just the straight up running back beast that he turned into for Utah halfway through their season. Basically, it was incredible to watch it play out and unfold. So he's another guy. I already talked about Bo Meester and his booming leg, the things that he was able to do. And then the other guys like Satao Laumea. This is where it's interesting. Like, was Satao better this year than he was last year? Maybe, I don't know. That's where even last year, I think if you guys remember back to that, I love Satao. I think he's a great player. We're going to talk about him later this week, getting the Senior Bowl invite. It's absolutely deserved. There's a reason NFL teams project him as a guard. I always thought he was better at guard than he was at tackle. So I thought his play was very similar. In fact, maybe I would say he was slightly better this year. I don't know. Like I said, I thought it was kind of the same, but I didn't think he was a first team tackle last season. That's just keeping it real. Happy for him that he got that recognition, obviously, but that's where I'm not like, oh, he's snubbed. He moved him down to second team. He's kind of the same player to me as well. That's where these awards can always be hard because, I don't know how these things are conducted. I highly doubt that the way they're collected, that someone watched every single snap of every single offensive lineman on there as well. So that I think that's just a factual statement. Moving on to Tawa Jr., Junior Tafuna, such an elite run defender. One of the best plays of Utah's season was when he had that fumble on Bucky Irving where he ripped it out with one hand and recovered himself. Just Tafuna, an absolute monster in the middle of the field for Utah. Does a good job pushing the pocket on third and longs too, and then just an elite run stuffing D tackle. Corrine Reed, exceptional in coverage, the play he made against UCLA, and of course also just what Corrine Reed is able to do from a linebacker standpoint, executing in terms of just tackling and just the job he does shooting those gaps and making plays. Offensive line, good to see them get their recognition on the second team. Keaton Bills and Michael Mokafisi. Even though the offensive line wasn't outstanding this season, I think honorable mention for those guys is fair because I thought they still did a lot of good things on the season. And while the Utah offensive line was down a little bit, that's where, once again, that's why I think they're honorable mention and not higher. Although Bills has an argument for second team to me. And same thing with Vaughn. I think Vaughn is an argument for second team. A lot of good defensive backs in this conference, though. Don't have an issue with him there. But Vaughn, the length, the speed, a couple times he got beat deep overall, but still way more times than not, I should say, held his own on the outside. So love seeing all those guys get their recognition that they deserve for the great seasons they played on the all Pac-12 teams. And I do want to talk a little bit, though. Jonah Elliss got the recognition he deserves, but Jonah Elliss was not named the Conference Defensive Player of the Year. Instead, Latu out of UCLA was. I think there's a discussion to be had there. Not going to necessarily say that he was snubbed, but I'll say I think it's a discussion. And it's a discussion I would love to have all of you if you would like to continue listening to this show with me. But first, do want to talk to you about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes in our friends at Jase Medical. I know we come for sports talk to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like aminoxidilin, right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. It's just a scary thought. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than knowing someone in my family or one of my family members got sick while a supply chain issue kept them from the life-saving medication they needed. Thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinuses, skin infections, among others. This stuff could happen to any of us. You can visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medication will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. You can go to jasemedical.com and use code LOCKEDON. That's a capital L, lowercase, everything until the O and on is capitalized. And you can use that code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order at Jase Medical. Also, want to talk to you about another sponsor of today's episode of Locked On Utes in our glorious friends at UCCU. Learn and Earn, the UCCU mobile banking app that pays your entire family to learn about money. Kids look to parents to become more financially literate, but parents, they don't always know the answers. Learn and Earn breaks down financial topics into fun, bite-sized educational games like quizzes and trivia. Every time a family member completes a topic, they earn points that can occur and can be redeemed for gift cards to stores like Amazon, Apple, Sephora, Walmart, Nike, and more. There is age-appropriate content for every member of the family who can compete against each other and track their progress on leaderboards. Learn and Earn is inside the UCCU mobile banking app, so you can play anytime, anywhere. The more you play, the more you learn, and the more you learn, the more you earn. Learn and Earn, part of UCCU's award-winning Be Money Smart Youth Banking Program, helping kids, teens, and parents have fun while becoming more financially literate together. UCCU. Love where you bank. Alrighty, coming back in. Let's talk some Jonah Elliss. An incredible season for Jonah Elliss. He had 12 sacks, even knocked down 3 passes, forced a fumble for Utah this season, had an impressive 23 solo tackles, 37 tackles overall, and that's despite missing the final 2 games of the season. That's where it's really a bummer to me about Jonah's numbers and production, because has he played in those final 2 games? Arizona, good offensive line. Colorado, not so good offensive line. I think Jonah, whether it's 2 sacks against Colorado or maybe just 1 against the Buffs, 1 against Arizona, I think he was getting to 15 sacks. I think he was. And, based on, once again, everything we've seen, I don't think Jonah Elliss is, unless it changes, going to declare for the draft. Maybe he's waiting because he wants to play in the bowl game, and then maybe after that he would announce it. But I don't know. I feel like there's a good chance he's coming back as of right now, which is when you have arguably the best pass rusher in college football coming back. Utah, big winner in that regard. I'm thinking big winner. Anyways, to talk about Jonah Elliss, I think I can make an argument he was snubbed for the Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. And once again, Latu was incredible. We got to see him play in person this year. All of you did in Rice-Eccles Stadium, and I was in that game as well. And he was incredible. You're talking about a guy who led the nation with 21.5 tackles for loss this season. Actually, the most by a Bruin since Anthony Barr, shout out Pac-12 website for that stat, was also tied for 4th in the country with 13 sacks this season and tied for the 3rd highest in UCLA history, but a finalist for all the major awards, just a tenacious and ferocious pass rusher off the edge. But I do think this is where it's Latu projects to the NFL, I think right now, maybe a tad better just based on what I've seen from people saying in the NFL. I don't know. Obviously, I just watched a lot of Jonah Elliss. I like Jonah Elliss and his ability, but I understand if Latu's maybe a tad or a hair more, a little athletic and got a little more of that twitch, even though I think Elliss does a pretty good job of that. And he just has that bevy and treasure chest of pass rush moves that we love to talk about in here, whether it is that devastating spin move, those sharp hands, just such a dynamic player, capable of winning with that spin inside or outside too. Does a good job setting up other moves and rushes. Just, man, when Elliss does decide to go to the NFL, it's going to be a nice and easy transition for him. But he was so dominant and dynamic this year. That's where I'm bummed that he wasn't named the Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year for him, because I think he very much so had an argument where I could say he deserved it. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, the injuries kind of robbed his stats of being even better than they were, because while he did have those 12 sacks easily could have gotten to 14 or 15. I mean, we're talking about a guy with 100 sack yards. I don't really care about 100 sack yardage, honestly. But when you see, like, literally, he took away 100 yards on the season from a team, that's just an incredible stat in favor of Ellis. Latu, very deserving player. Honestly, I don't have a big issue with him winning the award, but I obviously wanted Jonah Elliss to win. And I think we can make an argument there too. So, yeah, just one of those things where you look at it from Utah's perspectives and you're like, dang, it just missed out on it there. Also, really quick, I know this is Locked On Utes. Shout out Kate Uluave of or formerly of Mountain Ridge High School, now at Cal Football, for winning the Pac-12 Freshman of the Year. He's a guy who my first ever game when I moved out to Utah, I watched play in high school. There's probably most of you listeners who do not care about that, but I just think it's incredible that he was just named the Pac-12 Defensive Freshman of the Year. Just an incredible talent at the linebacker spot. And obviously Utah has their own incredible talents at the linebacker spot too, as we know what the various players like Lander Barton, Corey Reed, Demooney, all those guys are capable of doing. But yeah, it would have been fun to see where Cam Rising would have ended up in the race for like Pac-12 Player of the Year. Bo Nix won it. I don't have a problem with that. I do see Washington fans bringing up Michael Penix not winning it, and same thing. You could very well argue that Penix could have won the award. Fafita also got the Freshman of the Year. I think he's another guy that deserved that by a wide margin too. Mentioned Coach DeBoer already as well, and we already talked about a couple of those guys I said for Utah that I think deserve to be like honorable mentions. If Jaquindon didn't have the injuries, I think there's a good chance he ends up on this list. You know what? Before the season started, we got mad at the Pac-12 media for not having Jaquindon available to vote for the all Pac-12 teams, and I still, like, more than anything, I think the injuries that he sustained and just how banged up he was all season was one of the reasons he didn't end up on those teams, but he didn't end up on one. So I will own up and say I was wrong about that prediction. But yeah, I'm excited to see what guys like Keanu Tanuvasa is a guy I expect to be on this list next year. Was so close to making it. Just the way he started the season and stayed really impressive all season, whether it was taking on those double teams, creating pressure on the interior, does a good job shedding blockers, eating up double teams. I'm a big fan of Tanuvasa's game. And this Utah defense, guys like Samote Pepa, not on this list, guy into the season, I think we projected to be onto it. The injuries just really prevented him from having the same success he had last season. So he's a guy I expect to come back even better than we saw him this season and regain close to that 2022 form that we saw him shine at. Lander Barton, a guy who could very well be on this list next year too. Like Utah, well represented. Like Zamiah Vaughn could be even higher up on this list too, because there's just like a couple things Vaughn needs to improve on, and then he will make himself into a corner that he has all the tools and intangibles to me to be selected in the top 3 rounds of the NFL draft. Obviously, wasn't going to be the case if he went out this year, because he's still at Utah. And I think you saw as well, he got beat a couple times over the top, as we mentioned, but very close to breaking through. And I'm glad to see him at least get that nod on the honorable mention list. So an exciting group of players for Utah. And I'm excited to see what this group is able to do just in general going forward, because it is a Utah football team loaded with elite and premier playmakers who, of course, have one opportunity left, at least some of the guys I mentioned, not all of them, to make their mark. Oh, I should have mentioned Devon Bailey a little bit more too. I know I brought him up as a potential snub, but like Bailey's a guy who totally should have been on this list, if not for quarterback injuries and things like that. So it's unfortunate, but either way, that's just unfortunate how it shook out for Bailey. But as we talked about earlier this week, we wish him the best of luck on his future ventures at the NFL level. Before we get out of here, unfortunately, got to talk about Gianna Kneepkens' injury and the impact it's going to have on the Utah women's basketball team. But before we do discuss the devastating injury, I do want to talk to you guys about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes, in our friends at FanDuel. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including the spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So you can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. And speaking of the NFL, we do know that Utah is going to be playing in the Las Vegas Bowl, of course, in Allegiant Stadium, a venue that all of you know very well from the Pac-12 championships. We have enjoyed winning there 2 times before this season. But this week, for example, of things like you can bet on, my Minnesota Vikings. I'm a big Vikings fan. For those of you that listen to the show, I don't talk about them crazy, but I definitely bring them up from time to time. They play in that stadium. So I'm hoping my team can once again get a win when they take on the Raiders. Quarterback situation is still a little iffy for the Vikings, with Dobbs, I think, being the starter, but either way, it's going to be interesting to see if they can get it done. But I'll be heading over to FanDuel to look at the odds and lines that they have for these great games. And you can as well for your favorite NFL team, and even, college basketball. I was going to say college football. No college football this week. which does make me sad. Oh, Army Navy, of course. So you got Army Navy is going on, but either way, it'd be weird to kind of bet on Army Navy. I don't know why. It just sounds funny, but lots of great stuff going on at FanDuel. Okay. Downer, unfortunately, these are the things you just hate to have happen. Gianna Kneepkens is out for the season as she did break her right foot, broke several bones in her right foot, unfortunately. Coach Lynn Roberts announced earlier on Monday. This comes to us from CBSSports.com. On the season, Kneepkens was averaging 17.8 points per game, shooting 63% from the field, 54% from three. And yeah, just you hate it for the player as well. Someone, Kneepkens, in the midst of an incredible season, works so hard to get to this moment and have these opportunities. And that's who your heart breaks for, is the student athlete who puts it all on the line. Gianna Kneepkens, an incredible player for her sensational skills. Like, she was invited this summer to an exclusive camp, or just an opportunity hosted by Kelsey Plum, the WNBA star. Like, that's how good Kneepkens is. And it's just, like you said, you just hate to see these things happen to someone who gives so much to the game, who is a good person, as well, as we've all seen through the various media interviews. So yeah, just feel awful for Gianna. We'll get the medical red shirt, so won't lose eligibility out of it, is the one silver lining in this. But there's never a silver lining when someone breaks a bone in it. So you just hate to see it for her perspective. And then if you're looking big picture for what this means for the Utah women's basketball team, to me, and unfortunately, now look, they already lost to Baylor, but an injury like this is just hard. Like, I thought coming into the season, Utah had a chance to win the national championship. I'd argument to be made. More than likely Final Four. It's always going to be hard to beat the LSUs, the UConns, the Caitlin Clark at Iowa now. But if you looked at the depth of this team, it's like if things broke right for them and they got hot, I think they could go all the way, considering the national champ was the one that bounced them, and they almost beat that national champ last year. But you need to be at full strength. And I think not having Gianna means it's going to be incredibly difficult for Utah to do that. They are more than capable of making another deep run, Elite Eight, maybe surprising people and still somehow get to the Final Four. But hard to see them hosting a trophy, as improbable as it would have been anyways, without Gianna. As good as, the rest of the pieces on the team are. Obviously, Alyssa Peely still there, but Jenna Johnson doing her thing too, Deja Young. There's several players on this team, and still good guards too, whether you're talking about Palmer, Izzy. There's lots of players that they have who are capable of stepping up for them. Kennedy McQueen being another one. Like, there are lots of players on this Utah women's basketball. Lynn Roberts, an incredible coach. They're going to be fine in the Pac-12 overall in terms of still being good, but you can't reach your ceiling unless you're at your best. Utah football obviously saw that this season, and unfortunately, that's what has happened, unfortunately, to Gianna Kneepkens. So we hate to see it, and thoughts and prayers to her as she begins the process of making her recovery after surgery and everything. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Utes. On tomorrow's show, we'll be talking about some of the transfer portal news going on. There's some rumors about who Utah is interested in, an offer that's been reported. Look forward to discussing that. Also talk about the Utah men's basketball team. They got a big one coming up Saturday against BYU, and they did survive against Southern Utah. So we'll have to talk about that on tomorrow's show. Look forward to seeing all of you then.